Trade targets, Senior Bowl, overvalued and undervalued players. Welcome back to the Birdhouse Dynasty Show. Tonight, we're going to dive into some players you should be targeting right now in your dynasty leagues. Let's not waste any time. Let's get right to it, and we're going to jump right into CeeDee Lamb. From your Dallas Cowboys, CeeDee underwent just a terrible 2024 season. All of you CeeDee owners out there know what frustration you dealt with, whether it was the shoulder injury to end his season a couple weeks early, or the frustrations of Cooper Rush taking over for the injured Dak Prescott. It was just a rough season for CeeDee all around. He had the target share. It took a while to get on the same page with Cooper Rush once he took over. And so we all know what CeeDee can do. And the fact that he is valued down around 7,800, 7,900 right now on Keep Trade Cut. Wow, now is the time to go out and get CeeDee. If you remember this time last season where CeeDee was at, he was just rising right now to the cream of the crop. If you take the top 5 or 6 wide receivers in Dynasty, I'm talking Chase, Jefferson, Neighbors, Amon-Ra, CeeDee. Maybe if you want to throw, I don't know, Nico or Puka right in there with them. We all know CeeDee can perform as the top receiver in the league. Would any of you really be shocked with Dak coming back next year if CeeDee is the wide receiver 1? Probably not. But right now, according to Keep Trade Cut at least, you should be able to get something for something like, just for Jamar Chase, you would get CeeDee plus something right now. I'm all aboard for exploring those kind of opportunities, right? Because last year, basically CeeDee and Chase were flip-flopped. Chase was coming off of a struggling season, injured Joe Burrow. Chase was banged up, and look what he was able to do in 2024 for you. To top it off, CeeDee has been great at performing near the end of the seasons. I know from the leagues I have him in, he's performed great for me come playoff time. So definitely go out and explore CeeDee Lamb. I mean, he had under 1,000 yards. He finished like wide receiver 22, something silly. I mean, it was just bonkers how frustrating it was. And so maybe the CeeDee Dynasty owner in your league is frustrated with him and maybe just wants to get off the Cowboy train or whatever. But look, I don't care who the Cowboys draft at number 12. I don't care that Mike McCarthy's out of town. They just promoted somebody from within. So I don't think they're going to be running much of a different offense, right? They're still going to be slinging it around, even if they do go out and draft Ashton Genty, let's say. They're still going to end up throwing the ball if they're not in the lead. So with the Eagles and the Commanders in that division, do you really think the Cowboys are going to get to, say, 11 or 12 plus wins in 2025? I don't. I'm not going to bet on that. All right. So what that means is another mediocre Cowboys season, another season where they're trailing. Now, one would hope that they're not trailing by over 30, so that CeeDee's just sitting on the sideline in the fourth quarter. But as long as they're in the game somewhat, they're going to be slinging it this year. Yeah. Even if Genty is drafted, it's just going to help the offense. They may be a better team then, but it'll open up holes for CeeDee. If they draft Luther Burden, I'm not afraid of that. That will help take some coverage off of CeeDee possibly. So I think that him and Luther Burden would work out just phenomenal. Or if they draft some other wide receiver, it would just help CeeDee open up lanes for him And I just don't see a way he goes down in value from where he is at right now. Go out and check him out. All right. Let's get into some of the other guys that I wanted to mention. CD, of course, is up top, but we're going to kind of go down the list on the Keep Trade Cut board. Next up, we've got the Super Bowl participant, and that is Jalen Hurts. So they took the straitjacket off of him on Sunday, and it rolled to the tune of a 55-23 victory for the Eagles, sending them to Super Bowl 59 to take on the Chiefs. Jalen Hurts, 3 touchdowns on the ground, 1 through the air. He threw for, just 246, I think it was, but it was like his most in 5 or 6 games at least. So point being is that with Saquon's emergence this year, they have not had to throw the ball as much. They've won 15 out of 16 games. I don't blame them. All right. But I'm willing to bet the over on a line of 3,000 passing yards next season. Yes, Hurts was under 3,000 passing yards this past season. Okay. I'm still willing to bet Jalen Hurts can finish top 5 at quarterback. I hope you can see it out there, because if you don't, I don't know what you've been watching. So Jalen Hurts, still a possible top 5 quarterback any season, especially with his ground game and the tush push still being allowed. I don't have a problem with it. If you can't stop it, figure out a way. Don't make the NFL just eliminate it. I mean, come on. That's absolutely ridiculous. All right. What are they going to outlaw Saquon too because you can't stop him? I mean, that's just insane. So as long as that play is still fine and dandy, Jalen Hurts is going to get plenty of rushing touchdowns. Expect somewhat of a regression from Saquon next season. I don't believe, I'm being facetious here, I don't believe anybody's ran for 2,000 yards in back-to-back seasons. So you can kind of expect Saquon, barring health, to rush for maybe, 1,500 yards next year, 1,200, 1,300, somewhere in there, right? It's not realistic to expect another 2,000-yard season from a guy like Saquon. I mean, the guy had 5 or 6 touchdowns over 60 yards during the season, and then he's added a few more now in the playoffs. So all I'm saying is that I don't expect Saquon to be as much of an animal. I expect the Eagles to need to throw at some point a little bit more than they've had to this year. We all know their game plan, obviously, is not to have to throw as much. But to rattle off 15 wins out of 16 games, you can kind of understand why his passing stats have been down this season. So now is the time to go out and kick the tires on Jalen Hurts in your league. So I know I'm not getting rid of him in any of the leagues that I've got him in. So next up, we've got another top flight wide receiver, and that's Nico Collins. Nico flew a little under the radar this year when he went down with the injury. So try and check out the value on Nico with your fellow owners. If you've got a high draft pick and need a wide receiver instead of a running back, I'll tell you this, I'd much rather have Nico Collins than Ted McMillan. I love Ted McMillan. Chandler's in the house. What do you got here, Chandler? What's the value of the number 1 pick in a super flex league? Don't feel like quarterback will go top 3, maybe 4. So does it carry any extra value or not really? Excellent question, Chandler. And we're going to get into that when we talk about the Senior Bowl and East-West Shrine game a little bit coming up here. But the 101 right now, obviously, everybody, if you've not heard Ashton Genty right now, is pretty much the 101, even in a super flex league. And so barring him somehow falling to the second round, which is pretty much out of the picture right now, I feel pretty comfortable saying he's going to get picked in probably the top 15 at least, whether that means that it's, like I said, the Cowboys earlier, maybe the Chargers trade up, the Broncos trade up, Minnesota trades up. Any of those teams would be awesome offenses for Ashton Genty to get involved in. But the value of the number one pick, like, don't go by what Keep Trade cut. I mean, to me, I value Ashton Genty right there with Bijan and Jahmyr Gibbs. So I would put him right in that range, which is right around 8,000, I believe, right now on the Keep Trade cut calculator, if you want to use that as a basis. But in a startup, I would say it's valued right around the mid-second round, somewhere in there, barring there and being any crazy running back bonuses like a super inflated point per carry type league. But that's where I would say he's valued around. So if we bring up let's draw this one down. Let's bring up the Keep Trade cut rankings here for you guys, just to get an idea of where he's valued at right here. So there we have it. We're talking players right in this range here. So anywhere between Puka on down to Justin Herbert, 1-for-1 swap, I would say that's an even deal. I wouldn't have an issue trading any of those players for the 101 if you really want Genty. It's really up to you. I love Bijan. I love Gibbs. I think they're fabulous running back assets. They've got the youth. Okay, Saquon was awesome this year. Don't get me wrong. And he's 27, so he'll be 28 going into his next season. I don't expect as good of a production next year out of him. I think he'll still be very good. Don't get me wrong. But running backs enjoyed a legendary season injury-wise this season. So expect more injuries from running backs next year. Expect the wide receivers who didn't perform as well this year to probably perform a little better next year. So a lot of people, including myself, valued the wide receivers probably a little too high this year. And so what happened was the receivers got overdrafted a little and the running backs came. Now next year, it'll probably flip-flop back a little bit, or it'll regress towards the mean a little bit. But this is right in the range here. I would say 1-for-1. You're looking anywhere from, you could do Puka, Brian Thomas Jr., Amon-Ra, Mahomes, Nico, Justin Herbert, any of those guys. That's what I would be looking to swing the 101. Now, Chandler, are you mentioned quarterback here, in that you don't feel like the quarterback will go top 3 or 4. So does it carry any extra value or not really? So the 101, I believe, is still up there elite, pretty much similar to what it was valued last year with Caleb and Marvin Harrison. Both of those guys creeped up to about 8,000 in value, close to that range, 7,500 to 8,000. They fluctuated a lot prior to the draft. So they were in that ballpark, and that's pretty much where Ashton Genty will be. Now, the 102 drops significantly. I would think that drops down to anywhere, say, from the mid-third to the beginning of the 4th round. So then you're talking, let's slide down here to players in that range. That would be players, mid-third would be player 30. So then you're talking Devon Achane, Garrett Wilson, A.J. Brown. I think those guys are more in line with Ted McMillan, where he would be valued at. All right. So that's what you'd be looking at with the 102. And now you mentioned the quarterbacks. Yeah, me personally, I'm not super high at all on either Cam Ward or Shadir Sanders. Now, could that change? Maybe. I don't love, if Cam Ward goes to the Titans, I'm not betting on that situation unless I'm, totally rebuilding and there's no reason for me to trade for a veteran quarterback. But if you can, if you've got picks 104, 105 ish, 106, where one of these top quarterbacks will be going probably, I would definitely be shopping it around at least. Just find what veteran court. I mean, there could be a team in your league that's set with 3 or 4 quarterbacks, and so just because and here's a guy Dak Prescott I have as a buy here, and just because they have Dak Prescott and he's looking good and his return next year, I don't know that necessarily that team needs to keep him because they may have 2 or 3 other quarterbacks that they can use. Does it make sense to tier down to the 102 and get the value and still take best available at that time, or just take Genty? It's start 1 running back and 3 flex. So kind of feel like they're not as valuable with 4 wide receivers possible. Yes, it's a very good point. So if that is your setup in your league, I play in one league like that where it's 1 running back and we have Bijan. I'm a co-owner in that league. We have Bijan and we have Tyler Algier backing him up. So we basically put it as that's our running back room. We pick up other running backs here and there. Like this year, we picked up Kareem Hunt. Last year, we picked up Zach Moss, and we were able to get spot starts out of both of those guys. So, but the way it's all in the way you build. Yes, I would prefer in a format like this, Chandler, definitely just get your 1 solid running back that you can build around and then load up at wide receiver, or go the other way around, start with loading up at the wide receivers and then find your stud running back that you can trade for, like a veteran type running back that's elite, but maybe older, Derrick Henry, Christian McCaffrey, those types, Saquon even, right? So does it make sense to tier down to the 102? Well, that's all team dependent. You have Henry, Swift, Najee, Warren, Charb, and Walker. See, if you've got Henry and Walker along with Charbonnet, you are completely set at running back with those guys. I would be looking to load up at wide receiver. Make sure you get the 4 most. You could start 4, get 5. So you have 1 bench guy for injuries and bye weeks. Get 5 stud wide receivers. Just keep trying to tier up at wide receiver as much as possible. In your case, yes, a tier down to the 102 and taking Tet McMillan would be a very good option, depending on what you can gain with trading back. It kind of depends on who's sitting at the 102 in your league, because the guy at 102 may not see the need to go after Genty either. So that kind of plays into it as well. If he is shallow at running back, well, then, you can look. Wide receivers you have are Olave. I'm guessing that's BTJ. JMO, Pickens, Ladd, Leggett, McMillan, and Adams. Okay. So of those, I love BTJ, and Ladd would be the 2 I would rank the best right now. JMO, Pickens, and Olave are good, but those are the guys that you could, all 3 of them are guys that you could look to try and tier up with. All right. So it being that you're only starting 1 running back and 4 wide receivers, it's sort of a shallower league. So you don't want to go too low at wide receiver, seeing as you're going to build around that with your team. So what I would be doing is seeing what Olave plus, what JMO plus, what Pickens plus can go out there and get you. I would say go right after the top. I mean, start with the top 5 receivers. CeeDee Lamb's one of them, being that his value is a little lower. See what, I mean, don't go after Tet McMillan. I mean, as long as you're set at quarterback, I'm assuming you are. You haven't mentioned quarterback, so I'm hoping you are. But don't be afraid to try and package up the 101 with Olave, JMO, or Pickens, and get yourself up to that elite tier of wide receiver, and then get something else on the backside as a kicker in as well. All right. So you have Hurts, Tua, Purdy, and T-Law. Yeah, you are more than set. You could easily package one of those quarterbacks in. Now I have T-Law and Purdy as buys right now, so they're good selling opportunities. Just because I'm saying they're top targets, that probably means that half of the guys, at least in your league, also see them as good opportunities. T-Law would be a perfect guy right now, being that he's in the news with the Jacksonville new head coach hiring. I despise the guy right now, but he obviously did a good job in Tampa this last year, so he knows what he's doing. And so I see that T-Law, now you do have T-Law and Brian Thomas Jr., so if you don't want to mix that up, that's fine. Try and shop Purdy or Tua then, okay? All things being equal, Tua would be the lowest of the four, I would say, but that doesn't necessarily mean you have to deal him, because there's no reason to have three good quarterbacks where you're debating every week, do I start Purdy or do I start T-Law, right? Because Hurts is a for sure starter pretty much against anybody. So I would look to, you could easily try and package either of those three quarterbacks. Just keep Hurts, package Tua, Purdy, or T-Law up with one of your receivers of Olave, JMO, and Pickens to try and tier up as well. You've got a lot of nice options there. So, I would go, that's what I would be pushing hard for. And don't be afraid to overpay a little to get one of those top 5 wide receivers. So go after Chase, Jefferson, Neighbors, Amon-Ra, and CeeDee, and even Nico, him as well, or Puka. So those would be the main trade targets I would shop for every one of those guys in your league right now, Chandler. That's who I'd be going after. And if you get one of them, don't stop there. Go and try and get another, because if you've got the 101 plus all of those other assets, what I'm saying is right now is the time for you to slim down your value so that you don't have all these points just sitting on your bench. All right. So hopefully that helps, Chandler. Let me know how it goes. All right. I'd love to hear if any of those trades pan out for you or how those play out. All right. Back to the top trade targets. You bet, Chandler, anytime. So after, what were we on? We were on Nico. Yeah. Well, we all know Nico had a monster season when he was actually playing. Let's go bring him back up here. We can see his stats. So if I scroll down here, 2028, 12, 33, 17. Then he had his injury, and so he was out for 5 weeks. Started off rough, but then was right back into form. 19, 21, 15. Had a little rough patch there in the playoffs, but I would not be worried, especially with Tank Dell's injury. Nico is solidified as the one in Houston, and so I don't know. We don't know how Joe Mixon, ideally, I'm sure he's going to be back, and I wouldn't be surprised if Houston takes a running back in the top 3 rounds to eventually possibly replace Mixon. But, with Tank Dell out, I've mocked them, Egbuka from Ohio State, who Stroud played with. So he'd be a good option for them too. But regardless, it's not going to take away from Nico Collins. He is a stud. He is a bona fide top 10 dynasty wide receiver. Go kick the tires on him, Chandler, and the rest of you out there as well. All right. Next up, we're going to look at quarterback, and I'm going to start off with the rookie sensation in Denver. That would be Bo Nix. So some of you out there might say to sell high on Bo Nix. I'm looking at it from the other perspective in what a great season this kid actually had. I mean, with the expectations being not very high, even though he was drafted in the top 12 of the 2024 NFL draft, this guy fell into the perfect situation. He had a head coach who loved him right from the get-go. Sean Payton, it was said that he had him come out and warm up and threw 5 passes, and it said, that's it, that's enough, that's all I need to see. And so he knew right away this was the guy that he wanted. This was the guy that had the perfect passing arm strength and accuracy. I mean, I'm not talking strength when I'm trying to compare him to Drew Brees, because neither of them have great arm strength. But the point being is that his decision-making and everything else involved with that fit well into Sean Payton's offense. And now we know that this last year, all they really had was Courtland Sutton, and this guy was still able to put up a QB1 season in his rookie year. Add the rushing upside with Bo Nix, and then you throw in a top rookie running back possibly this season to help the ground game out in Denver, and who knows what wide receivers they could get through the draft to help them out. I mean, Marvin Mims looked decent this year at the end of the year, so if they grab another guy and Mims becomes more of the traditional 3 there with Courtland Sutton and somebody younger, maybe that's a route that they look to do. But regardless, Denver is going to help Bo Nix out by adding something in the draft, and you could expect to see a little bit of a value bump for Bo Nix at that point. All right. Next up, we're going back to the rookie class from the 2024 season, and we're going right to the top of that board in Marvin Harrison. So how many of you have Marvin Harrison this last year and were disappointed? Well, mind you, there were not too many rookie wide receivers that actually have put up better seasons than what Marv did. If you look at the analytics, like separation and those types of factors, ADOT, yeah, he had the second most missed air yards on the season, not by rookie wide receivers, all wide receivers. So that just goes to show you, if him and Kyler actually do put in some extra work this offseason, what kind of what this could become is just insane. So I'm taking Marv over Ted McMillan. I'll say that. So there's another option there, Chandler. I mean, you know, if you go down to the 102, I would rather have Marvin Harrison than Ted McMillan. And the reason being is, go back to draft capital and just the pedigree here with Marvin Harrison. He is one of the guys that's down in the 10 to 15 range at wide receiver right now that could find himself a way up into that elite tier. And I'm talking the elite as in the top 5 wide receivers in Dynasty. He is that good. Don't let a little bit of a disappointing rookie season sway you. This guy is legit, so don't forget about it and go out there and kick the tires on Marv. All right, next up, we're looking at another wide receiver. And this guy, well, depending on how you look at it, had a good season or a disappointing season. He was great in the games he did play in, and I look at it somewhat similar to Puka Nacua last year. Prior to the season, Puka had that knee injury, and he had fallen out of the top 10 dynasty wide receivers into that middling, 12 to 13, 14 wide receiver range, and was not able to bounce back up until he started playing again more. And Rashee Rice right now has fallen down into that range, but he could bump himself back up into the top 8 or 9 dynasty wide receivers easily. Now, we all know that there's a suspension looming, and Rashee Rice is a perfect target for a rebuilding club because we don't completely know what to expect as far as games played goes next season. But you can expect when he is on the field that he is the top target for Mahomes. And having that, being tied to Mahomes, look, I'm not going to be rooting for him to three-peat, but the fact is he's still pretty damn good, okay? And whether you like it or not, he's going to be good again next year. And so with a healthy Rashee Rice, that should be a monster tandem for years, as long as Rashee can keep his head on straight. But it's a good opportunity to go out there and buy Rashee Rice right now. Still, he's been a great buy for a while. All right, now we're going to go back to last year's rookie class and J.J. McCarthy, bring him up. So we all know how well Sam Darnold performed in Kevin O'Connell's system. Well, McCarthy is even more talented, in my opinion. So, when you've got Jefferson, Addison, Hockenson as your top 3 targets, it doesn't get much better than that in the NFL. Sorry. So J.J. McCarthy, yes, he may struggle early on to find his ground, but who knows? He might come firing right out of the gate. I mean, O'Connell he didn't hold the wheels back on Sam Darnold, okay? So he's going to, I think, have McCarthy firing right out of the gate. I know some detractors said that he never threw much in college, but that's because he didn't need to, okay? There's plenty of guys who in college didn't throw a ton, and then they threw. He didn't have Jefferson, Addison, and Hockenson on his team in college either. Think about that. And he was in the lead in the second half of just about every minute he played that last year at Michigan. So there's another factor in just the amount of pass attempts he was throwing in the second half of his games. So go out there and look out for J.J. McCarthy. If you can, go out there and get him. Now we have DJ Moore, who's valued at $4,500 on Keep Trade Cut. So we're getting into the more affordable guys that won't cost that much. Now, we all know Ben Johnson took over there, and Rome Odunze struggled. But the key here is that Keenan Allen probably won't be back. So now we're just looking at DJ Moore and Rome Odunze being there. So Rome Odunze could boom this next year, but that doesn't mean that's going to hurt DJ Moore at all. Keenan Allen had 120 targets, 77 catches, almost 800 yards and 7 touchdowns. That's all going to be gone. So that all ate into DJ Moore and Rome Odunze's production. Now, I don't know which one of these two between Moore and Rome Odunze will try and fill the Amon-Ra role in Ben Johnson's offense in Chicago. And I don't know that either of them really profiles as Jameson Williams. So we'll see how that works out. But I think it's more of Ben Johnson will just find a way to make it work with these two guys. And they'll probably get a playmaker in the draft. And who knows who that could end up being. But I like what I see for the future, the next couple of seasons at least, for DJ Moore, with a good quarterback, good young quarterback at least, in Caleb Williams. And so I think DJ Moore at 4,500 on Keep Trade Cut. I put a tweet out there where I'd say I wouldn't have a problem at all trading my 108, 109, 110 for DJ Moore. So if you're a contender and need production from the wide receiver position, this is a much cheaper option if you aren't able to acquire one of the more elite wide receivers in your league. All right. So next up, we'll stay in that range and we'll head over to another disappointing season from someone, and that would be old CMC. All right. So Christian McCaffrey. Well, I don't think his value has ever been this low. He's at 4,400 on Keep Trade Cut. And to give you an idea, let's bring up the rankings here again. 4,400 puts him not in the top 50, not in the top 60, but way down here at 71. Him and DJ Moore right now back to back. So let me bring this up for you guys. Here are the rankings. And so you can see there, they've got 25 late first right there at 64. So you're looking at, a late first for the potential RB1 in 2025. Yeah. If I'm going to be contending, that's something I would definitely look at going after. I don't need to sit here and tell you how good of a player Christian McCaffrey is and that he is a Hall of Fame caliber player. And when we're talking that kind of elite talent, those kind of guys produce until they don't produce at all anymore. Once they fall off, they usually just retire. So Christian McCaffrey, yeah, maybe Shanahan will dial him back a few touches here and there, but how many times has that been said over the last few years that, oh, maybe they'll hold McCaffrey back and he won't get this or that? Come on. Have you ever seen Shanahan to actually do that? No. If McCaffrey is healthy, he's going to be getting the rock. He's going to be scoring points. So go out, try and acquire him if you can. I don't mind even overpaying a little, because if you're going after McCaffrey, that means you're going out to win it. And so if you're making a winning move like that, I don't mind overpaying a little bit for this type of player. So a late first and a second doesn't bother me right now if that's what you give up for him. All right. Next up, we've got somebody I mentioned earlier, and this ties right into CD, and that would be Dak Prescott. Dak, of course, was injured in week 9, and so missed half the season. And let's pull Dak up here for you guys. Here we go. Yes, there we are. So as you can see here, week 9 against Atlanta was when he got hurt and Cooper Rush took over. So before that, though, Dak wasn't having his greatest of seasons, but wasn't too terrible either. If we look at the point totals, 11, 13, 29, 16, 16, rough one against Detroit. Might remember that, 13 and 13. So as the Cowboys struggled, Dak, obviously it wasn't his best of seasons, but who else do they have? The guy's getting paid an insane amount. It's basically an impossible contract to trade right now. And so they have no other option but to fire Dak out there. And again, I don't see the Cowboys in that division competing for first. They could easily be competing for a wild card. So I look at them more as like an 8-9, 9-8 type team next year. And that means a lot of throwing in the second half. Again, even if they draft Ashton Genty, but maybe that's a selling point or a buying opportunity because people think they're going to draft Ashton Genty, so they're going to run the ball more, blah, 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 I would buy Dak at this value. Again, with the quarterbacks being not as good in this draft, I would kick the tires with one of those middle round firsts. If you need a quarterback, I would definitely send one of those for Dak. I would have no problem with that at all. All right. Next up on the list, we've got Sam Darnold. And so Sam Darnold right now is kind of in no man's land, right? I mean, who knows where the hell he's going to play next year, but I don't think it's going to be in Minnesota. Not after his last few games of the season. I think he put the nail in his coffin as a Viking, but there's plenty of opportunities out there. Tennessee needs a quarterback. Cleveland needs a quarterback, and so do the Giants. Those are the first three teams picking. The Raiders need a quarterback. They're picking at 6. Okay, those 4 teams especially, it'll be super important in the free agency period what actually happens, because one of those teams likely is going to be going after him. And so, of course, then they probably won't be drafting a quarterback at the top end of the first round. But wherever Darnold goes, and ideally it's in a similar offensive scheme to what the Vikings ran. The Vikings ran a scheme based out of the Sean McVay offense. That's where Kevin O'Connell came from. That's the same style offense that Cleveland runs. So that's one team that I could see him fitting in very well for, and that would be the Browns. With the Browns having decent talent all around the rest of their roster, the quarterback position was obviously the one that really held them back this season. When Jameis Winston played well, the Browns obviously looked pretty decent. You know, they had an all right game there in Denver. Defense fell apart on them. They were able to beat Baltimore. So the Browns have talent. If Darnold were to go there, they could easily draft another wide receiver to add to the core of Judy and Elijah Moore there, and having David Njoku there as well. That gives them plenty of nice passing options. And so we'll see where Darnold ends up. And but the thing is, the key, you don't want to wait for that. You want to buy him now, because as soon as he signs somewhere, he's going to cost more. All right. So go out there. If you need a quarterback, you don't want to pay as much. You don't have to pay an early or mid first for Sam Darnold right now. Okay. You should only have to pay like a late first value. If you have to give up a mid first for Sam Darnold, you should definitely be getting something on the backside of that. All right. So that's the way I would go about looking to trade for Sam Darnold. Next up, we've got another player who was injured this season, and that would be Chris Godwin. And this is basically a bet on him re-signing in Tampa. I think that the Buccaneers organization loves this guy, and they're going to find every which way that they can to bring him back and keep the core intact there in Tampa of Evans, Godwin, and Baker. Obviously, Bucky Irving emerged this season, and so did Jalen McMillan, but I don't think that necessarily means that they're ready to just throw the number 2 wide receiver role right on the shoulders of what will be the second year for Jalen McMillan. It would only enhance their offense more if they have all 3 of them in the offense next season. So Godwin was playing like a top 5. He was a top 5 wide receiver prior to the injury. Monster target numbers. He was playing the Cooper Kupp role in that Rams offense that Liam Cohen was running in Tampa. And so if Godwin is back in Tampa next year, he's going to be a great steal for anybody who was able to acquire him at this point right now, before we know if he's going to Tampa or not. If he goes somewhere else, you can expect him to be getting targets, okay, similar to how Keenan Allen was able to swallow up a bunch of targets in Chicago in spite of Rome Odunze being there and DJ Moore. Keenan Allen got open. Chris Godwin is a guy who demands targets. He gets open. He has a role in the slot. He's that power slot type receiver, and he knows how to get open and pick up yards by the chunks. All right. So Godwin is definitely a nice solid buy right now. And last up, we're going to hop over to one that I talked about a week ago, and that would be Mark Andrews. So obviously this poor man did not have the best of playoff games in Buffalo, but that doesn't take away from what he's done in his career. We all know the slow start he got off to because of the car accident he was into prior to the beginning of the season. So he struggled heavily, mightily for the first month. And so it took him a while to get back into form. A lot of people maybe got rid of him, traded him, did whatever, because they thought Isaiah Likely was taking over that role. Well, the fact is that Baltimore runs a 2 tight end set like 50% of the time. And so Andrews is still going to get those looks. He's still going to be producing. He's cheap now. He's only at 3,300. So, I mean, if you don't want to bet on a rookie with a second round pick, and mind you, this is a very good tight end class, so I have no problem drafting one of the tight ends in the second round. But if you've got nobody at tight end and you want to fill that hole, there's no problem with drafting one in the second round and using a second to, that's if you got 2 seconds, you trade for Mark Andrews with another. So, or just go after Andrews and get the production. I mean, that's how I kind of look at it. If you're contending, I'd rather have Mark Andrews than a rookie, having to rely on a rookie tight end, because you never really know with rookie tight ends. The top 3 in this class are Tyler Warren, Colson Loveland, and Harold Fannin out of Bowling Green. All 3 of them could go in the first round. Tyler Warren is definitely looking like a first rounder right now. But they all have their own special fit, or comp, I guess I would say. Like Tyler Warren reminds me a lot of Brock Bowers. He's not that elite of a talent, but the way that Penn State used him, moving him around like a chess piece. He had over 200 yards rushing this last year as a tight end. Then you have Harold Fannin, who's very similar to David Njoku, and Colson Loveland is very similar to this guy right here, Mark Andrews, who can do it all, plays every down, can block well. And so Mark Andrews at 29, tight ends play for a while, so I could see Mark Andrews still going strong for another 2-3 seasons. There's nothing wrong with going out and trying to acquire Mark Andrews. And then I've got one more bonus for you rebuilders out there, and that would be Tank Dell. So this is an ideal opportunity to go and get Tank. His value is dipped all the way down to $29.99 on Keep Trade Cut. So that puts him at, a couple thirds, all for a guy who his quarterback just loves. And I know he had a horrific injury, again, to the same leg that he injured in 2023. But if you're rebuilding, nothing better than trading. If you've already acquired a mass amount of picks, there's nothing wrong with trading a couple of thirds, especially with this draft class and the weak wide receivers that are going to be around in that range. I take a dart on Tank Dell and just park him on your IR for the season. Nothing wrong with that. It won't hurt your max points. And you'll see that as he's going to come back, his value is going to stay this is probably about as low as it's going to get. Okay. So it's only going to increase from here. It might stay very stable at this point for probably the next 9 or 10 months. Okay. And then near the end of next season is when his value will start to creep back up. I wouldn't be surprised if before the 26 season, it's back up around the 4,000 range, somewhere in there, 3,500 to 4,000, somewhere in there. He'll just find himself in that mass no man's land of wide receiver 20 to 50 in Dynasty right now, because there's just a big clump of wide receivers right in that range. And it's really hard to evaluate them sometimes, but they're all in that no man's land where weekly it can change up and down. You get spike weeks, and you just want to have them in your lineup when those spike weeks happen. So go ahead. If you're rebuilding, Tank Dell is a perfect target for you. All right. Then let's talk about the East-West Shrine Bowl and the Senior Bowl coming up this week. They're practicing right now, and that's the main thing to pay attention to while these kids are out there practicing, trying to show the scouts what they've got. A lot of these guys are seniors, so they weren't, they didn't have the talent of a junior that was ready to come out, but they are all gamers, and these guys are battling in practice because they know that this is what the scouts are there for, more so than even the game itself. And so at the East-West Shrine Bowl so far, the practice, Jimmy Horn Jr. from Colorado has been showing out amazingly. He's a wide receiver, transferred over to Colorado in the portal at the same time that Dion took over. So he came with, he didn't play with Shadur Sanders and Travis Hunter at Jackson State. He played at South Florida, where he made a name for himself as a kick returner. But then this past season at Colorado, put up over 1,500 yards, was a monster. He's a smaller wide receiver, so a good fit as a smaller, speedy slot type receiver in the NFL. But in a wide receiver class that isn't that strong after the top 4 or 5, we're looking for anybody right now from top guys right now are Tet McMillan, then Travis Hunter, who we have no idea how much he's going to actually play wide receiver. You've got Luther Burden and Emeka Egbuka from Ohio State. I like Trey Harris right now as my 5th best wide receiver, but after that, man, I'll be picking running backs. That's how I'm looking at it right now. Maybe tight ends too. But so I'm looking for any wide receivers that can step up and make a name for themselves. And this is the time to do it. And these are the guys who have more experience. Any of these junior wide receivers that are ranked lower right now, maybe better served to go back to school, honestly. So the other dude showing out at the East-West Shrine game is Nick Nash, a taller wide receiver out of San Jose State. He made a great catch, diving one in the end zone today. And of note, Dion's kid, Shiloh Sanders, has been getting smoked and killing his draft stock right now. Over at the Senior Bowl, we've got some wide receivers doing things there too. One of my favorites of the lower guys, Xavier Restrepo. I should put him at number 6, honestly. That's he is a Wes Welker, Julian Edelman prototype. This guy is just an absolute gamer. He fights for everything he can get. If you watched any Miami games, you saw him get the ball, I'm sure, and you saw what he can do. He was a great help for Cam Ward and his monster season. Tez Johnson, another small, speedy, shifty wide receiver out of Oregon. He had the last couple of seasons were awesome at Oregon stats-wise, but he being smaller, he's going to have that role. I mean, he's a little bit bigger than Tank Dell, but not much, okay? So he really fits that kind of role as a wide receiver. He's been doing really well, completely unguardable at the Senior Bowl so far. And then his quarterback, Dylan Gabriel, has been a monster. Dylan Gabriel, of course, he's been 3 schools now. Started at UCF, then went to Oklahoma, and now finished up his career at Oregon with the most touchdown passes in college history. And so not only that, but he threw a ball 74 miles an hour. Now, to put that in perspective, at the combine, the fastest recorded time was 62 miles an hour by Josh Allen and Joe Milton last year. So 74 miles an hour is just insane. Now, that's what they clocked him at. So it's hard for me to argue it. That's what they say they clocked him at. That's what he threw it. But it just goes to show you've got Shadir Sanders and Cam Ward up top at quarterback. Then you're kind of looking at we're just waiting to see somebody else jump up and make a name for themselves. Jalen Milrose there, Jackson Dart. Those are two names right now. But Dillon Gabriel, I definitely see with his experience, and that's a big factor when scouts are looking at quarterbacks right now with the success of Bo Nix going to a couple of schools. You had Jaden Daniels the same way. And then you see the struggles of guys who decided to come out early, like Anthony Richardson. So I think that the scouts are turning more at the quarterback position in particular towards the guys who have stayed longer, had experience in multiple types of offenses and schemes. They're going to be able to adapt to the NFL game much quicker. And we know that the NFL teams don't want to sit on they don't want their quarterbacks sitting and waiting a year or two or whatever, like the Packers did with Jordan Love, right? And even Atlanta they didn't wait. I mean, Penix ended up getting in this rookie year, even with Cousins being there. Cousins obviously basically played himself out of a job, but regardless, the point remains, Penix is another guy too. He was at Indiana first and then went to Washington, showed how he could play there and bumped his draft stock up dramatically his last season. And so Dillon Gabriel is somebody to watch. He could be one of those guys that goes in the third or fourth round and then shows up at camp a la Russell Wilson and just takes over. I think this kid's a great leader. He can do it. I could see a team like maybe the Raiders grabbing him, and it would make sense. Pete Carroll grabbed Russell Wilson in the fourth, or was it third round? One of those. And he beat out Matt Flynn, who they had paid a huge free agent contract to, but Russell Wilson came in and took over, and the job was his. And so watch out for Dillon Gabriel. Next up that I wanted to mention too, RJ Harvey, running back out of UCF, very quick, shifty running back, good receiver. He's playing well, and so is Elijah Arroyo, another tight end in this monster tight end class from Miami. Again, another guy, along with Restrepo, that helped Cam Ward to his spectacular season. All right. And just a few guys I wanted to mention before I finish up here. I already talked about some undervalued guys I thought you should go out there and try and kick the tires on in your league. Some overvalued guys or guys that I think are good sells right now. First up would be Brock Bowers. I know I love the guy as a player. I don't think that he sucks by any means. I think he is the legitimate tight end one. I'm just looking at it from a positional thing. I don't know that in many leagues he truly is that positional advantage that, let's say, in the off season, it's worth having that position. It's not really worth having that positional advantage right now. Brock Bowers is a top 10 dynasty asset. Like, look at what happened to Sam Laporta last year. Now, I know Brock Bowers is a better prospect and is more talented than Sam Laporta, but just think of all of what you could have gotten for Sam Laporta last year, and what he dropped off to. A similar thing could happen to Brock Bowers. You got Pete Carroll coming into town and his slow-paced offense. He's going to want to run the ball. Don't think they're going to pass it as much. So you could see Bowers' numbers dip a little from last season's production. I mean, honestly, for him to ever beat what he produced last season is going to be a difficult task for Bowers. So don't, just because he blew up insanely in his rookie season, don't expect that every single season going forward. All right. Some other guys that I would recommend trying to sell. I know you're not going to like this, but Saquon, I mentioned it earlier. You can't expect a guy to run for 2,000 yards back-to-back years. I know he's just been absolutely phenomenal, but do you really think he's going to score 6 touchdowns over 60 yards as well? It's all tough things to produce again. And mind you, as it comes up with these next couple of guys, these running backs had a legendary season of sustainability and avoiding injury this last year. So expect some of these running backs who stayed healthy literally all season to not stay healthy all season. And on top of it, a couple of these guys that look like the surefire bell cows on their teams, they're going to get some rookie running backs drafted to their teams that are very talented and could easily overtake them at some point during their season. Because if they're older, even guys like my next one that I'm going to mention here, Kyron Williams, the Rams probably won't draft somebody because they just drafted Blake Corum last year. But Kyron Williams, I don't know. I was out on him last offseason. Now I'm doubling down and I'm saying go ahead and trade him for the value you can get it. He's at 5,500 right now. I mean, that's the equivalent to where Rashee Rice is. So I would take Rashee Rice over Kyron Williams all day. James Cook is right in that same range. Same thing. The sustainability of his touchdown production this year was just bonkers. 37% of his points scored this year were off of his touchdowns. And finally, the last two, Jalen McMillan and Isaiah Pacheco. McMillan right now is about a wide receiver 30. So he's like right there with Chris Godwin. And here, I'll bring it up just quickly to show you just exactly the guys that are sitting right around Jalen right now. And it's pretty wild, honestly. There we go. So if you want to look at just the kind of guys that you could acquire for Jalen McMillan, now if you're rebuilding and you're not planning on winning it all this season or contending, I don't mind hanging on to McMillan then in that case. But because, yeah, it's still possible Godwin does leave and then McMillan gets a much more expanded role this next season. But if you're contending, I'd rather have Jerry Jeudy if I'm contending. I'd rather have Tyreek Hill if I'm contending. If you can, look at that. McMillan's valued more than Sam Darnold right now. Okay. If you can 1-for-1 flip that, by all means, get on that train. Keon Coleman's right there. Now, Keon Coleman, production-wise, McMillan probably outproduced him, at least the last month of the season he probably did. But if you look at Keon Coleman's numbers, you'll see some higher target shares than you probably think. And with that offense, you got Keon Coleman, Khalil Shakir, and Dalton Kincaid. That's the core of what Josh Allen's going to be throwing to the next few seasons. I know they have Amari Cooper and Curtis Samuel there, but they could easily be gone next season. So you're looking at Coleman, Shakir, and Kincaid being the core that Josh Allen is going to be looking to all off season. And so Matt Hollins, I know came on this year, but he could be literally on any other team next off season. He's not signed for this upcoming year. So again, Keon Coleman could become the jump ball specialist for Josh Allen. And that's something I would like. I love Jalen McMillan because he's on my Bucks, but Keon Coleman, I would take in Dynasty over him. I'll put it that way. So literally any of these guys ranked 78 through 89, I would probably take over Jalen McMillan right now. I don't know about Jaden Reed. That's about even to me, just because Jaden Reed, I know he was hot last off season especially. But with the opportunity that Jaden Reed had this season with all the injuries to the Packers wide receivers and him not taking the bull by the horns and jumping on it. I am not in on Jaden Reed so much. But there you go. There's some buys out there for you. Go get out some of those trades out there. Let me know what trades have happened. Throw them onto my Patreon. If you got any other questions, please send me them. buymeacoffee.com/Birdhouse Dynasty Show, and check out the Patreon and my 2025 rookie class rankings on the Patreon as well at patreon.com/Birdhouse Dynasty Show. Thank you all for coming in tonight and joining us in the Birdhouse. Just remember to never stop working.